I hadn't been back to my hometown in years, not since Mom's funeral. Driving through those familiar streets now, with Dad gone too, I felt like a stranger, trespassing on my own childhood. The Mercer name used to mean something here. Our family had a reputation, discipline, dignity, hard work. But reputations don't last long when greed finds its way into bloodlines. I parked outside the old Mercer estate, the house I grew up in. The shutters needed paint, and the lawn was a mess, but I could still see Dad's touch in the rose bushes he used to trim with a soldier's precision. For a second, I half expected him to step onto the porch, strong and steady, telling me to grab the shears and help. But that voice was gone now. Inside, the air was heavy. My stepmother, Evelyn, greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Jonathan," she said, her tone sugar over steel. "It's been too long." Behind her stood my older brother, Richard, shoulders back, chin raised, like he'd already won something. "Good of you to come," Richard added. The way he said it, I felt more like an intruder than a son returning to mourn his father. I forced a nod, but I kept my eyes on the staircase. I remembered climbing those steps as a kid, running up to show Mom some drawing I'd made, or sneaking down late at night when Dad was still in uniform, shining his boots at the kitchen table. Dad and I didn't always see eye to eye, but he taught me one thing I never forgot. Silence has weight. He believed in timing, waiting until the right moment to act. I could almost hear him now. "Patience, son. Truth has its own hour." The house smelled different without him. Evelyn had redecorated, filled the halls with her taste. Polished vases, sterile portraits, nothing of the warmth Mom left behind. But one room hadn't changed: Dad's study. I slipped away while Evelyn and Richard spoke with the lawyer in the living room. The door creaked as I pushed it open. The study was dustier than I remembered, books stacked high, the desk cluttered but untouched since his last days. And there, on the desk, was the old laptop. I shouldn't have been surprised that he'd locked everything down. Dad was a Marine, meticulous, private. But as I moved the mouse, the login screen lit up, and with it something else. A folder sat on the desktop. It's titled plain, almost innocent, "For the Truth." My chest tightened. Why would Dad leave something like that in plain sight, yet sealed behind his password? I tried his old combinations, birthdays, service numbers, even Mom's initials. On the third try, it opened. Inside the folder were dozens of files, most of them receipts, spreadsheets, medical forms, but they didn't make sense. Charges for caregiver services Richard supposedly provided, dates that didn't match hospital visits, inflated amounts that bled Dad's accounts dry, and at the bottom, one file stood out: a video. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the mouse. The office was silent, save for the ticking of the old wall clock. Dad had always said he hated loose ends. Maybe this was his way of tying one final knot. I double-clicked. The screen flickered, and suddenly, there he was, my father, frail but determined, staring straight into the camera. His voice cracked, but his eyes burned steady. "If you're seeing this, then you already know what Richard has done. Don't let him take everything. Not again." My breath caught. I replayed the line over and over. Not again? What did he mean? The door behind me creaked. I slammed the laptop shut, heart pounding. Richard's reflection loomed faintly in the glass of the bookcase. And just like that, I knew. He'd been watching me the whole time. Richard didn't say a word when I snapped the laptop shut. He just stood there in the doorway, smirking the way he used to when we were boys and he'd caught me sneaking cookies from the jar. Only now the stakes weren't cookies. "Dad's old study," he said, stepping in like it belonged to him. "Brings back memories, doesn't it?" I forced a casual tone. Yeah, thought I'd look around before tomorrow. He circled the desk, eyes scanning the piles of paper, his fingers brushing the leather chair where Dad used to sit. You always were a sentimental. He stopped, leaning closer. But remember, Dad relied on me. I was the one here, day and night, not you. The unspoken accusation hung between us. I didn't answer. Dad's voice from the video still echoed in my mind. Don't let him take everything. Not again. When Richard finally left, I reopened the laptop. I had to see more. The files painted a picture darker than I'd imagined. Thousands billed under Richard's name for caregiving, medical transport, even medications Dad never used. Each receipt was a brick in the wall of fraud, a structure Richard had carefully built while Dad grew weaker. But the video, that was different. Dad looked into the lens as if he were speaking directly to me. His words carried the weight of a man who'd fought battles abroad and battles at home, who's seen betrayal up close and still believed truth had to stand in the end. I copied everything onto a flash drive. My hands shook as I pocketed it. It felt less like data and more like a weapon. The next morning, I needed answers. That's when I went to see Mr. Harris, Dad's old neighbor. Harris had been part of my life since I was a boy. He taught me how to bait a fishing hook, patched my bike when I wrecked it. He was the kind of man who saw everything, but spoke only when it mattered. His porch creaked as I stepped onto it, and he looked up from his rocking chair. "Jonathan Mercer," he said, squinting against the sun. "Haven't seen you in too long. Shame it takes death to bring folks together." I sat beside him, lowering my voice. "Mr. Harris, I need to ask you something about my dad, about Richard." The old man's eyes sharpened. Figured this was coming. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I saw things. Nights when Richard left the house with papers tucked under his arm. Visitors you wouldn't expect. Men in suits, not doctors. My pulse quickened. "Did you tell anyone?" "I told your father," Harris said quietly. "He already suspected. That's why he left you something. He trusted you, not him." From inside his jacket, Harris pulled a worn envelope. "Your father asked me to hold on to this just in case." I opened it with trembling hands. Inside were photocopies, bank statements, time logs, even notes scribbled in Dad's handwriting. Together, they formed a puzzle that matched perfectly with the files on the laptop. Richard hadn't just lied. He'd been siphoning money for years under the guise of devotion. My throat tightened. Why me? Why not give this to the lawyer himself? "Because your father said you'd know when to use it," Harris answered. "And he was right. You're the one who can stand up to them." I slipped the envelope into my coat. The weight of it felt heavier than steel. Dad's folder, Harris's evidence, the flash drive, it was all converging into one truth too sharp to ignore. Harris's eyes lingered on me as I stood to leave. "Be careful, son. Men like your brother, when they sense they're cornered, they don't just lash out, they destroy." His words followed me all the way back to the estate. That night, lying awake in my childhood room, I replayed Dad's video in my head. Don't let him take everything. Not again. But the part that kept me awake wasn't what he said. It was what he left unsaid. What had Richard already taken before? The next morning, sunlight spilled through the old curtains of my childhood room, but it did nothing to ease the weight pressing on my chest. The flash drive, the envelope from Harris, Dad's video, they were all stacked neatly in my bag, waiting like silent witnesses. Today, the lawyer would read the will. Today, Richard's performance as the dutiful son would either stand or collapse. I came downstairs to find Evelyn,
my stepmother, standing in the kitchen with a cup of tea in her manicured hands. She was dressed as though she were hosting a charity luncheon, not grieving her husband. Pearls around her neck, silk scarf tied perfectly. When she saw me, her smile flickered, then steadied into something carefully practiced. "Jonathan," she said softly, "you look tired. Long trip, I imagine." "Something like that," I replied, pouring myself coffee. She took a sip of her tea, watching me over the rim of the cup. "I hope you understand how difficult this has all been, for Richard especially. He sacrificed so much to take care of your father these past years." The words cut sharper than she knew. Sacrificed, that's what she called it. Lining his pockets while Dad grew weaker? "I'm sure it was hard on him," I said, keeping my tone flat. Evelyn set her cup down and leaned closer across the counter. "This family needs stability, Jonathan. Your father's estate, well, it should go to the one who proved he could handle responsibility. You have your life elsewhere. Richard has been here, managing everything." There it was, the first open strike. Not even subtle. She wasn't just speaking for herself. She was setting the narrative, rehearsing the story she expected me to accept. "You're saying I should step aside," I said quietly. "I'm saying that it's better for everyone if we avoid unpleasantness. Don't let pride drag this family through the mud. Take what's offered, let Richard lead, and we can all move forward in peace." Her words rang with a threat hidden under sugar. For a moment, I remembered my mother's face, the way she once cupped my cheek after a schoolyard fight, whispering, "Never let them decide your worth." The memory steadied me. I pushed my coffee aside. "Peace built on lies doesn't last long, Evelyn." Her smile faltered. "Be careful, Jonathan. Grief can make men reckless, and you wouldn't want to end up alone." I left the kitchen before she could see the anger boiling behind my calm. Later, as the house filled with relatives arriving for the reading, I spotted Richard in the hall. He was whispering to Evelyn, both of them glancing toward me as though I was already guilty of something. When he caught me looking, he grinned, an arrogant, knowing grin that said he thought the game was his. I kept my distance until I saw him duck into Dad's study, shutting the door behind him. Curiosity gnawed at me. Minutes passed. Then, as the last guests were being ushered toward the sitting room, I slipped quietly down the hall and pressed my ear against the study door. The faint scrape of metal reached me, a lock turning, papers rustling. Through the narrow crack of the door frame, I caught a glimpse, Richard kneeling in front of a small safe tucked beneath Dad's bookshelf. He pulled out an envelope thick with documents and slid it into his jacket. I stepped back before the floor creaked beneath me. My heart pounded as I made my way toward the crowd. Richard wasn't just pretending to be the faithful son. He was hiding something else, something he didn't want anyone, especially me, to see. And whatever was in that envelope might be the key to everything Dad had tried to warn me about. The day of the will reading weighed on me like an approaching storm. The house buzzed with relatives murmuring in low voices, some feigning grief, others clearly calculating what their share might be. But my focus wasn't on them. It was on the flash drive in my pocket, the envelope from Harris, and the memory of Richard sliding that thick envelope into his jacket the night before. I couldn't let him control the story. Not again. Before the reading began, I slipped out and drove to the law office. Mr. Collins, my father's attorney, had handled our family affairs for decades. His office smelled of old paper and leather, lined with books he'd probably memorized years ago. "Jonathan," he said, adjusting his glasses as I walked in, "I expected you later today." "I know," I said, pulling the flash drive and envelope from my coat. "But you need to see this first." He frowned, motioning me to sit. I placed everything on his desk, my hand lingering on the envelope Harris had given me. Collins opened it, flipping through photocopied bank statements, time logs, and Dad's handwritten notes, his brow furrowed deeper with every page. "Where did you get these?" he asked. "From Harris. Dad trusted him, said I'd know when to use it." Collins sighed, leaning back. "Jonathan, these aren't minor discrepancies. If this is true, your brother has committed fraud, theft, maybe worse. And if your father's video confirms it—" "It does," I interrupted. "I copied the file here." I slid the flash drive across the desk. He stared at it for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll review this privately, but if we reveal it during the reading, Jonathan, the fallout will be severe. Are you prepared for that?" I thought of Evelyn's warning, of Richard's grin, of my mother's voice telling me never to let them decide my worth. "Yes," I said firmly. "I'm prepared." Collins studied me, then reached for the phone on his desk. "There's something I should do, just in case. This isn't only about inheritance. If these documents are authentic, law enforcement will need to be involved. Better to be ready than blindsided." He dialed quietly, speaking in hushed tones. I caught only fragments. Possible fraud, estate protection, stay nearby. When he hung up, he folded his hands. "I've asked Sheriff Daniels to remain close during today's proceedings. He won't interfere unless necessary, but if things escalate—" He left the rest unsaid. For the first time in days, I felt the weight shift slightly off my shoulders. It wasn't just me carrying this anymore. On the drive back, I thought about Dad. He must have known how deep Richard's betrayal ran. That's why he left breadcrumbs, why he trusted me with the truth. But what haunted me was that phrase in the video, "not again." What had Richard already taken before? When I returned to the estate, the guests were gathering in the sitting room. Richard stood at the center, charming cousins with a rehearsed humility, while Evelyn hovered nearby like a queen securing her heir. Their performance was flawless, but I saw the cracks, the twitch in Richard's jaw, the way Evelyn's eyes flicked nervously toward me. I kept my expression neutral, my father's flash drive like a burning coal in my pocket. Collins arrived shortly after, briefcase in hand, his face unreadable. He greeted the family with polite nods, then caught my eye for the briefest second, a signal that the wheels were already turning. I took a seat at the edge of the room, hands folded, watching as Richard poured himself a glass of brandy like he owned the place. He raised it slightly in my direction, as though toasting a victory only he believed in. I didn't react, because soon his glass would shatter. The lawyer cleared his throat, asking for everyone's attention. Evelyn hushed the room, and Richard leaned back in his chair, smug and certain. And that's when I realized, in just a few minutes, the truth I carried could tear this family apart forever. The sitting room was packed, the air so thick you could almost taste the tension. Portraits of my ancestors lined the walls, faces that seemed to watch us silently, as if waiting to see which Mercer would dishonor the name. Collins, the lawyer, stood at the front, adjusting his papers. His voice carried authority, but even he seemed aware of the eyes drilling into him from every corner. Evelyn sat closest, her pearl necklace catching the chandelier's light, her hand resting on Richard's arm as though she were crowning him before the will was even read. Richard leaned back in his chair, confident, smug, his brandy glass balanced delicately between his fingers. Every now and then he glanced at me across the room, that same grin pulling at his mouth, like he'd already won, like my presence was just a formality. Collins cleared his throat. "We are gathered here today to honor the wishes of the late Mr. William Mercer. As executor of his estate, it is my duty to read his will aloud and ensure his instructions are carried out to the letter." Murmurs rippled through the room. Some leaned forward eagerly, others sat stiff, bracing for disappointment. The reading began simply enough: bequests to charities, modest sums to distant cousins, a few personal items to old friends. But then Collins's tone shifted as he approached the heart of it, the estate, the business assets, the inheritance everyone was waiting for.
To my eldest son, Richard Mercer, Collins read, who has served as my primary caregiver during my declining years, I leave the Mercer estate and controlling interest in the family trust. The room erupted in whispers. Evelyn's eyes shone with triumph, and Richard's smirk widened into a smile of pure satisfaction. He leaned forward, placing his glass on the table with a click, as if sealing the deal. I sat frozen, the flash drive heavy in my pocket. My hand brushed against it, my pulse quickening. Everything inside me screamed to stand up, to expose him right then and there. But Collins wasn't finished. He continued, to my younger son, Jonathan Mercer, I leave a financial share of the estate to be determined upon final appraisal, with my gratitude for his independence and resilience. Polite words, but nothing compared to the grand bequest laid at Richard's feet. A few relatives glanced at me with pity, others with thinly veiled satisfaction. To them it looked like justice, the dutiful son rewarded, the absent one given scraps. Richard turned in his chair, his smile directed at me now, wide and victorious. Guess Dad knew who he could rely on, he said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. Laughter followed from a few of his allies, and Evelyn's hand squeezed his arm as though she were crowning him before the will was even read. I forced myself to stay calm. Silence has weight, Dad's words echoed in my head. Timing mattered. If I spoke too soon, if I moved too quickly, the truth could be dismissed as bitterness. Collins wrapped up the document, placing it carefully back in his briefcase. We will now proceed with signatures to finalize acknowledgement of the will. The family began to shuffle, preparing pens and papers, their chatter rising in a swell of self-congratulation. Richard stood, brandy in hand again, making a show of shaking hands with relatives who praised him as the new head of the Mercer name. Evelyn basked in it, glowing like a queen beside her chosen heir. And I sat quietly, hand slipping into my pocket, fingers brushing against the cold metal of the flash drive. My mother's voice rang again in my memory. The truth may cost you everything, but it costs more if you hide it. Collins laid the documents flat on the table. Richard Mercer, please come forward. Richard stepped up, pen in hand, pausing just long enough to throw me one last look of triumph. I rose slowly from my chair. My legs felt like steel, my heart a drum. The room hushed, eyes swiveling toward me as I moved to the center. Because I knew the moment had come. The room froze as I stepped forward. Richard's pen hovered above the page, his smirk faltering just slightly. Evelyn's pearls caught the light as she stiffened, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. I'm sorry, I said, my voice steady, louder than I expected. But before anyone signs, there's something we all need to see. Whispers rippled through the family like a current. Collins raised his head sharply, his brow furrowed as though he already knew what was coming. Richard's jaw tightened. What are you doing, Jonathan? Evelyn asked, her voice dripping with forced calm. This isn't the time. It's the only time, I replied. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the flash drive. For a moment, the tiny piece of metal felt like a weapon, gleaming under the chandelier. Collins hesitated, then gave a subtle nod. He opened his laptop and slid it toward me. My hands didn't shake as I plugged it in. Please, I said, watch. The screen lit up. Dad's face filled the room, older, frailer than most of them remembered, but unmistakably him. A hush fell. Even the ticking of the grandfather clock seemed to pause. If you're seeing this, then you already know what Richard has done. He's been taking money under the guise of care, creating invoices that never existed, bleeding this family while pretending to protect it. Don't let him take everything. Not again. Gasps, murmurs.
Heads turned toward Richard, whose face had gone pale, his smile shattered. "This is absurd," Richard barked, stepping forward. "It's fake. Jonathan must have—" "Silence!" Collins cut him off, his voice sharp as steel. "Let the video finish." Dad's eyes, sunken but fierce, bored into us from the screen. "I love both my sons, but only one of them can honor the truth. Richard has betrayed that trust. If justice matters to you, look closer. The records don't lie." The video ended, leaving the room in stunned silence. Then chaos erupted. Voices rose, relatives shouting, some demanding explanations, others whispering accusations. Evelyn clutched Richard's arm, her face twisted with panic. "They won't believe this," she hissed at him. "Say something." Richard slammed his fist on the table. "He was sick, delusional. You all know it. This is Jonathan's doing. He fabricated it to steal what's mine." Collins snapped the laptop shut, his expression unreadable. "I've already reviewed corroborating documents. These claims are consistent with discrepancies I've seen in the estate's records." "You're siding with him?" Richard's voice cracked with fury. "I'm siding with the truth," Collins said. I stood tall, my heart pounding, but my voice calm. Dad trusted me to bring this forward. He left evidence because he knew one day the lies would surface. He wanted the truth to speak louder than Richard's excuses. The family erupted again, but beneath the noise, I saw something shift, the doubt in their eyes as they looked at Richard, the cracks spreading through his facade. Evelyn's grip on his arm tightened, her face pale, her composure unraveling. Richard pointed at me, his voice breaking into a roar. "This isn't over. You think you can shame me in front of everyone? I won't let you ruin me." Collins raised his hand. "It's not Jonathan who ruined you. It's your own actions." The room fell tense again, heavy and still. Richard's chest heaved with rage, his knuckles white against the back of a chair. For the first time, he looked less like a victor and more like a man cornered. And just when I thought the chaos couldn't deepen, Colin's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen, then looked straight at me. His eyes said everything. The sheriff was here.
The room was still buzzing when the front door opened. Heavy boots echoed against the hardwood floor, silencing every voice. Sheriff Daniels stepped into the sitting room, his broad frame filling the doorway. His presence was like a gavel slamming down, sudden, final, undeniable. Richard froze, his face draining of color. Evelyn shifted uneasily in her chair, her pearls trembling against her collarbone. The relatives fell silent, their whispers dying as the sheriff's gaze swept the room. "Afternoon, folks," Daniels said, his voice calm but edged with authority. "I was asked to remain nearby in case anything required my attention. After what I just heard, I think it does." Richard tried to compose himself, straightening his jacket. "Sheriff, you've been misled. This is a family matter. My father's mind wasn't sound in his last days. My brother is exploiting that." Daniels raised a hand. "Save it. I've received documents from both Mr. Collins and Mr. Harris. Bank statements, logs, signatures. They paint a troubling picture, Richard. Very troubling." Murmurs rose again, sharper this time, like the hiss of a fuse burning toward an explosion. Evelyn's hand shot to her mouth. "This is outrageous," she whispered. "You can't accuse him based on evidence?" Daniels cut her off, his tone sharp. "Because that's exactly what I have." I looked around the room, watching the shift in faces. Aunts, cousins, even family friends, all turning, their admiration for Richard dissolving into suspicion. For years, he'd won the mask of the dutiful son, but now
Under the sheriff's scrutiny, the mask was cracking. Collins opened his briefcase and placed the envelope Harris had given me on the table. "These are corroborated by your father's own handwriting. And the video we all just watched, William Mercer anticipated this moment. He left instructions in case anyone questioned the truth." Richard slammed his hand on the table, rattling glasses. "Enough! This is a conspiracy. Jonathan's been jealous his whole life. You all know it." His eyes darted, searching for allies, but found none. The sheriff leaned closer, his voice low but carrying across the room. "Richard Mercer, I'm not placing you under arrest today, but as of this moment, you are under investigation. Do not leave town." The blow landed harder than any set of handcuffs could. Richard staggered back, his chest heaving, his face twisted between rage and fear. Evelyn looked away, unable to meet the family's eyes. I felt my pulse steadying. For the first time since Dad's funeral, I wasn't just carrying the truth alone. The weight was shifting, resting where it belonged, on Richard's shoulders. Then, Harris, who had slipped quietly into the back of the room, cleared his throat. "I saw him," he said firmly. Every head turned. "I saw Richard leaving with papers at night. I saw men come and go. Your father told me himself he feared Richard was taking advantage of him." Richard spun around. "You old fool, you're lying!" But the words rang hollow, desperate. Daniel stepped forward, his hand resting on the badge at his chest. "Richard Mercer, I'm not placing you under arrest today, but as of this moment, you are under investigation. Do not leave town." The blow landed harder than any set of handcuffs could. Richard staggered back, his chest heaving, his face twisted between rage and fear. Evelyn looked away, unable to meet the family's eyes. Collins began gathering the papers, his tone cool and final. "Until this investigation concludes, the distribution of the estate is suspended." The relatives whispered again, but this time the tide had turned completely. No one was celebrating Richard anymore. No one was praising Evelyn. The silence of disgrace filled the room. I stood still, every eye on me now. Not as the absent son, not as the outsider, but as the one who had brought the truth forward. And as Richard's glare met mine, his eyes bloodshot with fury, I realized something chilling. This wasn't over. Not for him.
When the sheriff left, the house felt heavier than it ever had before. Silence pressed down on us, broken only by the faint creak of the old chandelier swaying above. Relatives avoided Richard's eyes now, whispering among themselves, their admiration curdled into suspicion. Evelyn sat rigid beside him, her pearls no longer gleaming, but clutched tightly in her fist, as if they might shield her from the truth. Richard stared at me across the table, his face pale but burning with hatred. His jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might break. I didn't flinch. For years I had lived in his shadow, dismissed as the son who left, the one who moved on. But now the truth had spoken louder than both of us. Collins stood, his voice steady. "Until the investigation is concluded, no assets will be distributed. The estate remains frozen." He closed his briefcase with a decisive snap that echoed through the room like a gavel. The gathering dissolved quickly after that. Chairs scraped, cousins muttered goodbyes, and one by one they slipped out, some with pitying looks toward me, others with disgusted glances at Richard. By the time the last door shut, only Evelyn, Richard, and I remained. Evelyn rose first, smoothing her scarf with trembling hands. "This isn't over," she whispered. Her eyes, usually sharp and cold, looked glassy now. "You've humiliated this family, Jonathan. You've humiliated me." "No," I said quietly. "Richard did that himself. Dad only made sure the truth wouldn't be buried with him." Her lips tightened, but she said nothing more.
She looped her arm through Richard's, pulling him toward the door like a mother dragging a sulking child. He resisted for a moment, his eyes locked on mine, promising revenge without words. Then they were gone, their footsteps fading down the hall. I stood alone in the Mercer's sitting room, surrounded by portraits of ancestors who seemed to stare down at me with a silent verdict. I wondered if they were proud or ashamed. Maybe both. Harris stepped in quietly from the hall, his cane tapping the floor. He gave me a small nod. "Your father was right to trust you. It couldn't have been easy standing up to them." "It wasn't," I admitted, my voice rough, "but it was the only choice." He laid a hand on my shoulder, firm and steady. "Truth has a way of finding its way to the surface. You just gave it a voice." That night, I sat in Dad's study, with the lamp casting a soft glow across the desk. The laptop sat closed now. The folder for the truth was still on its desktop, silent but no longer a secret. I thought of Mom, her voice, her touch, her words that had carried me through these days. The truth may cost you everything, but it costs more if you hide it. I realized then that Dad's last gift wasn't the estate, or the money, or even the documents he left behind. It was trust. Trust that I would do the right thing when it mattered most. For the first time since his passing, I felt peace settle over me. The house creaked in the night, and outside the wind rustled the rose bushes Dad had once trimmed with care. I breathed deeply, letting the silence wrap around me, not as a weight, but as a promise fulfilled. Richard would face his reckoning in the courts, with the sheriff watching his every move. Evelyn would cling to whatever dignity she could salvage. And me? I wasn't leaving empty-handed. I was leaving with something greater than inheritance. I was leaving with the truth. And in the end, that was the only legacy worth carrying.